Okay, so for succession, right? So the description is here, but I've already mentioned it, how to do this. So this is a picture showing primary succession again. So notice it has exposed rocks. We have lichens and mosses. Then we have small grasses and shrubs. Then you have smaller trees, and then you eventually get to larger trees. Now, aquatic ecosystems can go through succession as well. Okay, typically it impacts smaller water systems rather than larger ones. So, for example, a small pond over time will become shallower and shallower. Okay, and that's just because naturally, when it rains, some of the sediment, so you imagine if there was, let's say a hill here, when it rains and you have surface runoff, naturally you're going to have some of the soil get actually pushed into the pond. So what happens is over time, and again, this happens over hundreds of years, okay? This is not going to happen to a pond tomorrow. Over time, it becomes shallower and shallower until it becomes basically like a marsh, or I should say a marsh or a wetland, and then eventually it becomes just dry land. So it becomes like just grass or part of a forest community. So over time, it can happen. Now, will this happen to Lake Ontario? No. Okay, so the lake is much, much, much larger than this small little pond. You would need a lot of soil to make its way into Lake Ontario for it to even come close to this. Now, I bet you if you were to compare the depth of Lake Ontario now, like let's say how deep the deepest point is, to how deep the deepest point was maybe like 200 years ago, I bet you it would be a bit shallower than it was then. But we're not talking to the point where it would dry up the lake. Okay, so I've already mentioned about the animal stages as well. So as you have the progression of a forest community over time, the animals will then migrate into the area depending on the different resources that are available. Okay, so press pause on the video, and I want you to order these in the correct chronological order. So let's say time, right? As time progresses, what letter would be in the start, and then continue the letters until what the last picture would be. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, so hopefully you were able to, this is not too difficult of a question, but you should have D at the start, then C, B, A, and then lastly showing E. Okay, so what are some good things about succession? So of course, if there is no life in a certain area, right, after a volcano has erupted, you have an ecosystem that will recover, right? So you have recovery. That's great. But what ends up happening also is because of the fact that succession is a possibility, is it allows ecosystems to maintain over long, long periods of time. So meaning you have, let's say a forest community, even if it has a devastation of, let's say, a forest fire, in 200 years from now, that forest community will still be present. So it's not like every time there's a disruption, the whole thing will never recover, or else globally that would make a huge impact, right? Okay, so just a little note, however, there are some human-caused disturbances that not all human-caused disturbances can be repaired. So for example, if there is a disturbance, like let's say there's a forest community and the trees were all cut down, okay? You have to allow that forest to rebuild. Okay, so let's say, 20, 30 years go by and there are small trees that are starting to grow. If you go back and you recut them down, you're not allowing succession to happen. When there is a disturbance, you have to allow that system or that ecosystem to replenish itself. Okay, obviously, as humans, we can actually help that by planting trees, right? So if trees have been cut down, we can actually speed up the process by planting trees and allowing that time lapse to be shortened. But if we continue to destroy the community, of course, we're not going to be able to have that community ever come back. Okay, so I have just a short little video here that I want to play for you.
Succession.
Okay, let me just start that over. It's not, it's literally like 2 minutes, but it's nice. It just recaps everything that we've talked about here. Let me shift this in so we can actually see this. All right.
Succession.
Okay, so hopefully that solidifies kind of what we've been talking about. Just be mindful, the timeline they gave on that video, you would not have a full forest community regrown in 30 years. But it's just to give you an idea and a comparison between the two.